Alright guys, it's no shock by now for anybody who has considered themselves a gamer at some point in their life that the shills in the access media and the people who cover gaming and the so-called games journalists actively hate the fan base, the customer base, the people who actually buy games. Because they want to replace us with this, modern, diverse audience that supposedly exists, yet they don't buy any games. So of course, we've seen sites like Kotaku go after gamers, people like Alyssa Mercante, who is pretty much one of the worst people that exists online, going after gamers for being incels and man babies. We've seen The Verge attack people over the fact that Gamergate is allegedly smaller and sadder, this time around. But now we are seeing a shift this year. It's not just Eurogamer and The Gamer and Kotaku and IGN and The Verge and all these other sites that are attacking gamers. We are seeing a massive amount of anger and vitriol directed at gamers from within the games industry itself. It doesn't matter if it's tabletop games, it doesn't matter if it's actual video games. The industry is full of people who truly hate the customer base, the actual people who buy the product, and they desperately want to replace us with the modern inclusive audience. But again, this is an audience that has proven time and time again that they do not show up to buy the slop that these companies are putting out. So you can see that there's this article from that Park Place where the Mass Effect board game designer attacked fans as effing man babies after the game received negative reviews allegedly for pushing gender ideology. And the gender ideology, the non-binary crap, the chest scars that we were seeing in Dragon Age the Velguard, all the pronoun nonsense that really kicked off back with Starfield, but it did go on, it happened before then obviously in other games. Body type 1, body type 2, these are all things that gamers are sick and tired of in their video games because, let's be honest, this is in there for a very small percentage of people. It's only there to, again, try to get more ESG funding through these diversity initiatives and try to virtue signal as hard as they can for this modern audience that, once again, doesn't spend any money. So of course, a lot of you probably remember that earlier this year we had the Adeptus Custodes retcon, where Games Workshop decided to go out there and gaslight the fans and tell them, oh yes, we've always had female custodians as long as time has existed, and then when anybody pushed back against them, they blocked everybody en masse on Twitter, and this just caused a massive firestorm. Games Workshop stock has yet to recover, and this is far from over. But again, I want to stress that this is definitely a new thing the last couple of years where you see these studios, these companies, these developers, these publishers actively attacking the longtime fans and customers. It's a bold strategy. We'll see how that works out for them. But of course, Ubisoft being the worst offender in all of this, Ubisoft, a company whose own CEO earlier this year tried to label gamers and customers as racists and misogynists and sexists simply because they did not want to, purchase whatever slop Ubisoft is currently pushing out, even after they put out that quote-unquote quadruple A game Skull and Bones that nobody bought, and then the miserable failure that was Star Wars Outlaws. They wanted to blame racism and sexism for this. And of course, shortly after Skull and Bones came out, we saw this article talking about how essentially Ubisoft wants their customers to get used to not owning their games. Very strange, very curious, very live in the pod, eat the bugs, and you'll be happy kind of rhetoric here. But this is something that we have seen Ubisoft especially pushing. The fact that they released this Prince of Persia game that allegedly did really well for the fans that actually played it, but didn't do very well in sales because they didn't put it on Steam right away and forced the gamers to play it through Ubisoft's launcher, which caused the studio that made the game ultimately to shut down. Now, personally, I think there's a lot of other reasons that this game could have done better. For me, looking at the hairstyle they gave this Persian guy, it didn't make much sense. It very much had that Killmonger look from Black Panther. And when you see that kind of stuff time and time again, it's hard not to see it anymore. But we are seeing some amazing pushback coming from an unlikely place. Baldur's Gate 3's publishing chief has now called out Ubisoft's broken strategy, saying that if gamers need to get used to not owning games, developers must get used to not having jobs. Now, what I find fascinating about this is the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian is a game that is considered to be fairly woke. So it's strange to see this opinion coming from somebody within the gaming industry not blaming gamers, but blaming Ubisoft for the failure of this game. And again, we've had a lot of conversations lately about wokeness. What is it? How do you identify it? What makes a game woke? Asmongold pointed out, that it was disappointing that this happened considering the quality of the game, but releasing a Metroidvania with EA not on Steam and way above the market expectation of price, of course it failed. Great example of how publishing strategy can literally kill a game. I pointed out that the Killmonger cut likely turned off a lot of potential players, but Zach, of course, responds and says, quote-unquote, woke content, or the lack thereof, can make a bad game worse, or a good game better, but it can't make a good game bad or a bad game good. I digress. I think I differ on this opinion here. I do believe that a injection of wokeness into a good game will in no way make it better. But again, Baldur's Gate 3 was not great because it was woke. It was great because it was a great, well-made game. And then there was, of course, some wokeness, if you want to call it that, in the game itself. But to be fair about Baldur's Gate 3, from what I've heard from a lot of people who have played the game, if you don't want to do certain things in the game, the beauty of it is you don't have to. So again, it's the perfect scenario where, yes, it exists, but you can avoid it if you truly don't want to get into it. So of course, he lambastes Ubisoft, says essentially that they have done this to themselves. So this article here says, Larian director of publishing Michael Dowse, never one to be shy about speaking his mind, has spoken his mind about Ubisoft's decision to disband the Prince of Persia Lost Crown development team, saying it's the result of a broken strategy that prioritizes subscriptions over sales. Prince of Persia Lost Crown is quite good, and again, this is something I have heard from people online. PC Gamer's Molly Taylor felt it was dragged down by a very slow start, calling it a slow burn to a fault and an overall positive review, and it holds, of course, an 86 aggregate score on Metacritic. Metacritic doesn't really mean a whole lot, but, it is a way of looking at the game. So, Dowse says it at least partially feels like the outcome of Ubisoft's focus on subscriptions over conventional game sales, that the whole feeling comfortable with not owning your game thing, espoused by Ubisoft Director of Subscriptions Philip Tremblay earlier this year, and the decision to stop releasing games on Steam is far and away the biggest digital storefront for PC gaming, is definitely what is to blame for this failure. He says the last notable game on their platform was arguably Far Cry 6 in 2021. The Crew, Mirage, and Avatar came in 2023 and didn't perform, so you can assume subscriptions were at a lull when Prince of Persia released by 2024, which means people would not be launching their store all too much. And this is true. I have the Ubisoft launcher somewhere on my computer. I had it for 1 or 2 games through my Game Pass subscription. I don't even know if I have the Ubisoft launcher installed anymore. I don't own a single game on that launcher. If it had released on Steam, not only would it have been a market success, but there would likely be a sequel because the teams are so strong. It's such a broken strategy. The hardest thing is to make an 85+ game. It is much, much easier to release one. It just shouldn't be done as it was. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown did eventually come to Steam, but not until August 8th, 7 months after its initial release, which again is part of the reason for the failure. And then he went on to say, if the statement gamers should get used to not owning their games is true because of a specific release strategy, then the statement developers must get used to not having jobs if they make a critically acclaimed game is also true, and that just isn't sensible even from a business perspective. So again, going hard on Ubisoft and blaming them for their own failure. But it gets better. He even quote tweeted them in this article here on Twitter and said, oopsie doopsie. Star Wars Outlaw is my game of the year, so they're not allowed to be mad at me. Okay, it might be metaphor. And again, it is really funny because he knows that they're going to be mad at him, especially given the fact that this is not the first time he has spoken his mind. Another article from Games Radar earlier this year said Baldur's Gate 3 publishing director compares success of the effing CRPG to Palworld, saying it's not rocket science why the survival game is doing so well. He said the secret to Palworld's success is really effing simple. So this is a guy who once again has had no problem criticizing the developers and the publishers in the games industry, and somehow he has managed to get away with it despite the fact that any gamer or any customer who criticizes them, we're bigots and racists. This comes from an interview with GameFile in which Dowse states that despite Larian Studios' partners being great, ultimately, if you're working on anything outside of PC, you have to advocate very heavily for what you're doing. This industry is still obsessed with genres. I mean, we made the most expensive CRPG ever made. If you're a guy whose job it is to say, well, what projects should we do and what are the risks, you're going to look at our game and go, well, it's an effing CRPG, why should we take a bet on this? Niches don't exist anymore, you know? Maybe we should start taking more bets instead of being like, oh, X, Y, and Z are expensive. Then he even went on to criticize marketing, and he said that marketing is dead because players don't want to be bamboozled, and we learned that with Baldur's Gate 3. Marketing is dead, he said. Marketing is dead, it truly is. I can back this shit up, man. There's no channels anymore. It doesn't work. You used to have marketing, communication, and PR. Marketing was essentially a retail theory. You were trying to get your box on the right point of the store shelf, and you have partnerships with retail stores. Those pipelines are gone. Now you've got the internet. Nobody is looking at ads anymore. All of the channels that we would usually market through are no longer very viable. so their function is also reduced by the fact that players just want to be spoken to. They don't want to be bamboozled, they just want to know what you're making and why you're making it and who it's for. Ironically, Michael Dowse is not the only one inside the industry who is pushing back against this narrative that gamers need to be pushed out of the industry and replaced with this modern audience. Of course, the CEO of Moon Studios, Thomas Mahler, the one who made No Rest for the Wicked as well as Ori 1 and 2, has been massively pushing back against this woke messaging in video games for months now, even gaining the ire of Kotaku's Alyssa Mercante, where she labeled him a dickhead and then he basically schooled her on exactly what he was talking about and why it matters. Of course, we've also seen people like Daniel Vavra from the studio that made Kingdom Come Deliverance pushing back against woke messaging in game, pushing back against artificial diversity initiatives, and getting labeled as a pro-Gamergate developer. And not to be left off this list, of course, the Saber Interactive's CEO, back a few months ago, putting some comments out there on an Asmongold video that essentially were akin to, yeah, it's time to retire some of this woke crap and get back to playing some good games. And again, that's just me paraphrasing. They're not the only ones, though. We're now seeing Marty O'Donnell, who is actually running for Congress, I do believe, the composer from the original Halo games, as well as Nathan McCree, another composer from the original Tomb Raider games, also getting more heavily invested in political messaging and trying to push back against a lot of this DEI initiatives that we're seeing forced into the modern gaming industry. But I'm going to leave it right there, guys. Let me know what you think about all this. Let me know what you think about Baldur's Gate 3, what you think about his comments as far as how Ubisoft has basically cut off their own nose to spite their face, and I will see you guys on the next one. Alright, and if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you for being here. I do have two channels, Minimal Effort Podcast, as well as my gaming channel. I do have a Twitch and Kick for my gaming channel. We do live streams over there occasionally, maybe once a week. And then if you are in the market for a new PC, make sure to check out Meta PCs. Click the link I have down below. Use code TBO at checkout for a special discount. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.